What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the MulletCast, the podcast where business and pleasure collide. My name is Evan Balmer. Follow me on Instagram at Evan Balmer. Our guest today is Summer Deaver. Summer is the executive director of Yoga Peace Kula, a 501c3 in Howell, New Jersey. It's a yoga center, teaches mindfulness in schools, offers teacher training and workshops. What's going on, Summer?
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for joining us. I should mention, check out Yoga Peace Kula, which is KULA.com, on Instagram at Yoga Peace Kula, and follow Summer on Instagram at Sacred Shape. So thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So I bumped into you through an introduction from someone, sort of in my own mindfulness quest, and then you arrived, which was cool. So for people that don't know, what is mindfulness?
I like the working definition of the ability to be present in the moment with whatever's coming up. So it might be bodily sensations, experiences in the environment, thoughts, feelings, and to not judge them, but to be aware of them. Notice how they affect the situation.
That's pretty cool. So how did you kind of come into this practice, and where did your journey start with all of this?
I guess my journey started as a 6-year-old laying in bed, closing one eye and saying, hey, things look different from my right eye than from my left. And sort of asking bigger questions at a young age. But then it led through, from a yoga practice in college because of way too many drugs and rock and roll and things like that, leading to some depression. And then I have a pretty extensive background in Buddhist studies in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Mm-hmm. But recently, mindfulness has come up for me in going through just challenging experiences in life, things like divorce, and needing to show up and be present in a way that's right here and right now, and not on a retreat or escaping somewhere.
Right. Yeah, kind of everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty cool. So what led you to yoga? You said depression, and were you doing yoga at the time, or was it something kind of suggested to you?
No, I was in art school in Athens, Georgia.
Oh, wow.
And partying pretty hard.
Right.
Living the good life.
Right.
Lots of rock and roll.
Were you from down there?
My family's all from South Carolina.
Okay.
So from Greenville, South Carolina. I was in college and I was working at kind of a rock and roll cafe where all the bands for the 40 Watt would come in and hang out. And there was a yoga studio right behind it, so people would also come in from yoga, just blissed out and peaceful. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but I need some of that.
Right.
So I signed up for a 6 or 8 week course, a beginner's yoga class, and was oh, wow, this is everything I'm looking for.
Right.
Spirit, mind, body connection, moving and breathing and feeling alive. Yeah.
So how did your kind of studies progress from there?
Soon after I moved to New York City, I dabbled a little bit in yoga, and it really started after September 11th. So I was in New York for September 11th, and then went to Omega Institute in upstate New York.
Right.
And there was a shamanic retreat, and there was this transmission of all the people that had passed away, communicating with their spirits and helping them move into another realm, explaining what had happened. And I was like, I have no idea what's happening, but all I know is I can go do yoga by the lake. So I went to the lake, I practiced yoga, and I was like, at some point in time I'd like to become a yoga teacher. Thinking 16 years down the road when I've mastered every pose.
Right.
And then I returned to New York City a few days later, and a friend was like, I'm out of here. I can't stand New York anymore. I'm going to move to California, but come meet my yoga teacher before you leave. So I went to this yoga class with her, and the yoga teacher was like, hey, there's a training that starts in 2 days, and you should be in it. And I'll get you a scholarship. So from sort of this serendipitous prayer or intention,
right,
I found myself a week later, with not a ton of experience, but studying yoga.
Class. Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. So were you in New York, were you trying to pursue an arts career?
I was, yeah.
And what were you doing at the time?
I dabbled a lot in different things in New York City. So I worked in fashion for a little while, and, back and forth between Vegas and trade shows and that kind of thing, which I didn't like very much.
Right.
But I've always been a painter and sculptor. And so, yeah, I think as a 22-year-old in New York City, it was a hard reality to come out of art school and move to New York and see like, oh, this is a whole industry and a hustle,
Right.
and a lot about who you know. So I made artwork in New York City, and showed a little bit various galleries, but it was never anything I did full time.
Right. That's cool. So what's the yoga training like? Is it how long does it take? That kind of stuff.
The one that I did in New York City lasted 9 months.
Wow.
And it's 200 hours. So there's intensive study on the philosophy, the history of yoga, the energetic system of the body, practice, meditation, anatomy, physiology of the body, and how those things relate to modern times.
Right. Yeah, I had no idea. Like, I was looking on the Yoga P School Instagram, and it had some like information about like yoga texts and things. So I never even knew like that part of it. So it's interesting. So like, what can you learn from like studying that portion of stuff?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a philosophy of yoga, which differs from what we have in the West, so we hear a lot about karma or the merit of our actions. So the yogic texts get a little bit deeper into that understanding. The understanding that yoga philosophy says that we have a pure self or a higher self or the essence of who we truly are, and that's obscured by this changing self, the one that we relate to in terms of our thoughts and our emotions and our body and everything that's temporary. And so the practice of yoga is to discover that true self, that pure nature. So the physical practices, the meditations, the breath practice is all meant to wear away those layers so that we have an experience, a direct experience.
So that's the best way to find your true self.
Yeah. So the texts explain that whole philosophical or contextual reason for why we're looking really good in Lululemon pants.
I saw this stand-up comedian. It's still one of my favorite lines ever. He was talking about, he's like, in 2015, a lady named Lululemon, invented the pants that changed the world forever.
Make your ass look fantastic.
That's great. So did you immediately dive into becoming a yoga instructor after you finished the course?
Yeah, I did. I think it was just the timing in New York City. So it was 2002, and when I finished my training, and there was a need. Like, yoga studios were popping up everywhere, and there was a need for more yoga teachers. I think it's a little more competitive these days to get a job. But yeah, I was really young and running all over the city, from the Upper West Side to the East Village to Williamsburg to Flatbush and Park Slope, and 18 classes a week, and living on green juice and avocados.
Right.
Not something that's sustainable.
Right. So did you get burned out by that?
I don't think I got burnt out. I just started to become a little more business savvy, so putting together I might be getting paid $100 to teach a class there, but it's taking me an hour and a half to get there. And so starting to really just hone in, pare down, reorganize. And then when I had my daughter, I was like, I can't do that anymore.
Right.
And I ended up teaching more workshops, retreats, teacher trainings.
That's cool. And then how did your study of meditation or Buddhism and all of those things evolve? Was it all at the same time, or?
Yeah, so there's a pose at the end of yoga called Shavasana. It's like you lie like a corpse. It's still, quiet. You're integrating all the physical and exercises you've done. So I would come out of that and be like, wow, okay, I'm ready to meditate. Like, what do I do? And in yoga, there's not a lot of instruction in that regard. It's like, okay, cool, we're going to sit for 1 minute, chant Om, and then you're on with your day. Right. So I was looking for more information around that. And then, then I started, reading more about Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism. Right. I think like the color and the art and the ritual around Tibetan Buddhism I was very attracted to. So started studying, like went to India, studied with the Dalai Lama, and really? Studied with some pretty well-known Tibetan teachers.
What's that process like? Like, how do you study with the Dalai Lama? Like, if someone wanted to do that, it doesn't sound like it would be easy to land in that situation.
India's not for everyone. Right. So, the Dalai Lama, his teachings are really open, and he comes to the United States often. Right. So it's not hard to study with the Dalai Lama. It's definitely, though, like a college-level course of intellect to have the endurance to comprehend, to sit through, to really be in that analytical space of mind. Right. So when we went to India, it was really just a matter of like having a hotel and then going to the temple daily. I think it was like 10 days or 2 weeks of teachings on the Bodhisattva's way of life. Right.
And what was that like?
Well, it was a mixed experience because it's so beautiful to be around so many people who have this devotion and this practice, and then I was sick the entire time. I got really? Parasites in India, so it was difficult, right. And then at the teachings they serve Tibetan tea, which it's like black tea laced with yak butter, so it's salty and it's pretty intense. So you're kind of like, your breakfast and your lunch is like butter tea, and that's an acquired taste.
So did you walk out of it like relieved to be out of there, or was it some sort of like kind of
I don't know
awakening experience?
I think if you've ever been around the Dalai Lama, like there's this kind of, I don't know, there's a reverence and like a peaceful magic, like there's somebody that's alive and on this planet that's just this vibrant, transcendent kind of person who's working for the benefit of every living being in their best, expression of themselves. And you really feel that being around him, even if you're 700 people away. Right.
That's pretty wild. So what did you do when you left then? Like, how did that kind of set your course for where you went?
So when I came back, I had this desire to find a real, like, authentic teacher that I could study with, sort of the deeper teachings of Tantric Buddhism. And my partner at the time was studying with a teacher in upstate New York who would come from India to upstate New York once a month and lead this very traditional, authentic Tibetan Buddhist retreat. And it's an 8-year process of learning different practices and teachings along the way. Right. So I met that teacher, and I've been there for about 13 years now.
Wow. So you went through that 8-year training? Wow. That's intense.
Yeah.
So, like, that's what I was interested about too. You mentioned earlier, like, as a yoga instructor, you started becoming business savvy, right? So now you're an executive director of a center. So obviously you're taking all the teachings you've learned, but you're incorporating business into a lot. And you've held a similar position at other places, I think. So what's the difference between just being an instructor and then running a business as well? And where did you pick up those skills?
Yeah, my dad ran a business as a kid, so there's sort of this acuity towards, I don't know, organizing things, leadership. I'm like the oldest child, so I'm, I would always like gather everybody around and make things happen. Right. So there's like the natural inclination towards that.
What kind of business did he have?
My dad, he ran a textile business.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. So I definitely have an interest in fabric and textile and print, and that's kind of where some of my art sensibility has come from as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I there's a stigma I think that goes with yoga teachers, which is like, oh, it's like everything's cool and okay, and like I'll just like get by with whatever I have. And when I became a mom, I was like, okay, that might have worked, for my life beforehand, but now I'm responsible for this other being, and I enjoy really wonderful, beautiful things in life, like traveling and fine textiles.
Right.
So, and I think there's a stigma too, like around being spiritual and having money, like you can't do both. But I think actually more of us that have a spiritual inclination need to be more responsible for more of the money in the world in order to like allocate it into places that can actually benefit the planet, rather than just complaining about corporate greed. Like if we started to have more capacity for taking in more money and then distributing it well, then we could make some significant changes. So I think with those things in mind, I started to study a little bit more along the lines of business, whether it was like coaching or taking online programs or listening to like thought leaders and and study leadership a good bit more. And then running a nonprofit is not something I have experience with, so I showed up into that with just like the willingness and the opportunity to learn, like this beginner's mind kind of mindset, and I still am,
That's cool. So how did you land there?
I met Hal Ornstein. He's the founder of Yoga Peace Kula. I went to take a yoga class, and I met him, and he was incredibly generous, and I was kind of looking for a new mentor in a different realm. And I just said, will you mentor me? And he was like, yeah, meet me at Applebee's next Tuesday, And so, so we started meeting regularly. He was working on building this, yoga studio, and with concepts and ideas of it being nonprofit and giving back to the community, and it not being like a $20 drop-in, but something people could afford more regularly and bring in a little bit more diversity. And I was really excited about that concept because yoga studios have definitely taken a turn, to cater to white privilege over time. So, I was like, let me come on. I started consulting, and then the people that were sort of in place all started falling away, and like, here I am. I'm the
You're now
main
director.
Teacher and the director and all of those things. So.
That's cool. Yeah. So do you like that mix?
I do. I really do.
Yeah. And what's like the biggest, I guess, struggle you've had like taking over that role?
Doing everything.
Yeah.
Like being the one who's like, putting up the events on Eventbrite and marketing and, signing people in and giving them refunds and then showing up and delivering something of quality in terms of teaching. So everything from grant writing and sales and marketing to,
So, I guess you got to like block all that stuff out, right?
Or hire someone.
Yeah, that's true too.
It might be time for that.
That's true. So I guess the mission was to make yoga accessible and affordable for anyone, regardless of your ability to pay.
Yeah.
Was kind of the mission. What goes into like fundraising and keep making that possible?
Well, we have some amazing members at the studio that contribute monthly to making that happen.
Right.
So within the studio, the members' contributions outside of their like regular class fees
Gotcha.
kind of subsidize all the scholarships we're able to offer for other people who can't regularly afford class. And then the grant writing, the grant work, and and working with partnerships with other nonprofits, that allows us to then go into school and offer this quality professional development in mindfulness and yoga and stress reduction techniques for teachers, for staff, for students.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's interesting. I was talking to someone last night, and they were saying their daughter, I want to say, is like 7 or 8 roughly, and she's telling me that in her school they're teaching mindfulness. So she's like, my daughter came home from school and told me, we're about to take a math test, but I have to take my mindful breath before my test, basically. So I thought that was interesting that it is like coming into schools and things like that. So how has that evolved, and what's your kind of role in that?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A few weeks ago, like the day before school started, I went to a professional development day in one of the districts, and so it was district-wide, and they'd asked me to come in and teach mindfulness. But before I got there, they had a 2-hour training on a school shooting protocol, like a new protocol that was in place. So, I show up and I'm watching a live reenactment of Sandy Hook, and I feel my nervous system get totally shot into this fight, flight, or freeze response. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sweating, and I'm a little panicky, and my heart's racing, and I'm like, how am I going to go stand up in front of 400 or 500 teachers and lead them through mindfulness practice? And I'm like, this is though what it's about. This is like, there's so much going on in schools these days, whether it's, the struggle with addiction and suicide, and the demand for taking tests. It's like a total antiquated system, no child left behind. It's been modified over 20 years. We've never had an education policy in place this long, but the demands of that on youth, and then the parents kind of getting caught up in the numbers and the test taking, create these real life stressors where youth, like especially teenagers who have these amazing brains that are like constantly growing and changing, and they're the ones right now who could be solving so much of the world's problems if we gave them the support and the structure around that. So I feel like mindfulness is just kind of, right now it ends up being almost just the management of the stress that's in the school system. But there's this opportunity to, if it becomes a sustainable practice within the school, to really tap into the rich resource that the youth are for our world at this time.
Right.
So that's kind of my intention and where I'm going with it.
That's cool. And in this particular area, are like most school districts like seeking this out, or is it just a few?
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening. I mean, Asbury has had this in place for almost 5 years now.
Oh, really?
Long Branch is really on board. There's a lot that's happening in the Howell School District. So there's a good amount of support from the superintendents, and I think Coltonec's had it in place for a while.
Right.
And yeah, I think there's a great receptivity to it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So the idea, I guess, is, like you said, mainly just to provide some relief from the stress of school or life as a kid, basically.
Yeah. So like when the brain is in this space of fight, flight, or freeze, it's going to react. It's going to react in a way that it protects itself, right? Because that's what it's meant to do.
Right.
So then that leads to, like, it doesn't create healthy relationships when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze response. So we're automatically like assuming a judgment, we're ready to fight, we're defensive. And so mindfulness makes the literal shift from that limbic system, the fight, flight, or freeze part of the brain, to the frontal cortex, the part where we can start to have empathy and compassion and create relationships and say, oh, yeah, I might not agree with you, but like I understand where you're coming from.
Right.
Or maybe you didn't have breakfast this morning and you're in a bad mood because of that. Like, so I can back off a little bit. And instead of just automatically putting up a wall and blocking you out because you said something I don't like, I can express maybe how I'm feeling.
Right.
Which is like, I'm noticing I want to be really defensive. I'm noticing I'm angry or upset. And I'm just going to put that out there, and like, so that's like the first step of teaching. It's emotional intelligence as well, which has been involved in, businesses for many years. And now we're just kind of bringing it into the schools, and social emotional learning is like the kind of the key word for all of this.
Right. So it's probably like a part of the curriculum that was ignored forever, right?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I guess. That's pretty cool. So what's the difference between mindfulness and meditation?
Mindfulness is a specific kind of meditation.
Okay.
Right. So we have different ways to meditate. And mindfulness, sort of in the school system, can refer to just a state of awareness. Like I just mentioned, like, I'm aware that I'm being defensive or I'm putting up a wall.
Right.
That can be an act of mindfulness. Meditation is like when we're actually seated, there's a stillness that begins to happen. In yoga and in Buddhist texts, meditation is something that actually spontaneously happens. It's a state of no longer experiencing self and other. So there's a state of being completely aware and absorbed in the moment.
Right.
And mindfulness then is this specific practice at getting there.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. All right. What I wanted to try is like a meditation.
Yeah.
But can you maybe offer some advice for people that want to start meditating? Like for me personally, I never meditated in my entire life until recently, and I started with apps and stuff like that. So I mean, if you could offer some advice or how people should get started.
Yeah, I think Insight Timer is a really great app. There's so many wonderful teachers on there. One of my favorite is Tara Brach. So she offers little stories, little meditations. Sarah Blondin is another person there recently that I've discovered. But everyone is on there that's teaching meditation. So I think it's a beautiful way to start, and you can pick anything from 5 to 10 minutes. You can listen to a talk. It can just be focusing on your breath, focusing on your body, deep relaxation, help going to sleep. So yeah, that's probably my suggestion for like a good resource. And it's hard. People say like, oh, I can't do it. It's hard to do it on your own in the beginning, I feel like. So finding a group or finding a teacher, to study with, and then eventually going on a retreat. There's nothing quite like the experience of silence when you're, away out of your normal daily routine and situations, and then dedicating some real time to practice.
Right. That's cool.
So that would be sort of
the progression.
Yeah, progression from
that's cool.
Start to
awesome
getting involved.
All right, and I should mention you have a mindfulness class at Yoga Peace Kula every Tuesday, pretty much, right?
Yeah, Tuesdays at 5 p.m.
Right.
It's by donation.
So yogapeacekula.com, check that out for summer's class. What kind of meditation do you want to try here?
Let's just do a like coming into the body meditation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so posture is important. We'll come to just a comfortable seat, and to the best of our ability, a tall spine. The eyes can either close or gaze down softly at one spot. And then feel this moment. So what part of the body is actually touching the ground? Perhaps the feet, the seat. And ground into that. Allow gravity to have a sense of weight and pull on those parts of the body. And then relax in the mouth, so release the tongue from the roof of the mouth. Come into the full expression of the face. Relax the space between the eyebrows. And then soften the abdomen, so we're no longer holding in and up. We're allowing for the abdomen to release, to expand with the inhale. And in this moment, receive the breath. Notice the natural breath coming in and out. And then move or shift in any way you need to. Notice how you feel. And just the result of that minute or two being still and quiet. How do you feel, Evan?
I feel good. I feel like the first time I did it, it made me think of things I never thought about before. Like I don't think I ever knew I breathed in my stomach, or like part of the breathing pattern was through your abdomen. So that was weird to like feel it kind of the first time and think about it that way. I mean, it does feel like it definitely takes away any of those outside thoughts, like you mentioned, right? Like all those distractive thoughts or the stuff that's in your mind or whatever. It clears, it's like a clear space for sure, which I think is cool. The other thing I never really thought about is like the feeling of that connection to like what do you feel connected to the ground? Like, so now, like, that's been in my mind a few times. Like, if I'm walking around somewhere or, like, I just stop somewhere, like, I think about that, which is interesting because I don't think I've ever thought about, like, how are you connected to the earth or something like that, which is, like, a kind of a cool thought.
It's absolutely necessary right now.
Yeah.
For the survival of our planet, I feel like. Yeah, we're all part of the earth, right?
Right.
Yeah, so many cultures too have these practices like forest bathing or like being out in nature. And when we have that loving connection with the home that we live on, planet Earth, then it's like, okay, we will take compassionate action.
Right.
It will come.
Right. Yeah, it's weird because probably technology and everything has taken you away from that connection, right? Like you're so much more insulated for, like, you're in a house, in a car, in front of a computer, like, so that almost there's so many barriers between you and nature, earth, in a lot of ways, like, so you forget, I think, or it's like unlearned almost,
Absolutely.
like you're almost like this weird person, like traveling not connected at all, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of bouncing around Earth and other objects or whatever.
But then we're here and we're like so close to the beach. So just all it takes is just go take your shoes off and walk barefoot on the beach for a few minutes,
Right.
Or step outside or
touch the water.
Notice the leaves changing color.
Right.
Appreciate that.
Yep. The other thing I've noticed a lot recently, like probably since a combination of things, but spending more time like by the beach. But I think also since I've been, in your class, is the sky is like so insane around this area by the beach and everything, between sunrise, sunset, but also like cloud patterns and things. It's amazing. Like, so for whatever reason, like lately, that's my obsession is like the sky. It's like wild.
Yeah. We live super close to the beach, so like sunrise every day is different.
Right.
It's such an amazing experience.
Yeah, and then the colors in like the western sky in the evening are like insane too. Yeah, it's really cool. So it's a great spot. What is like two things I'm curious about, like in that meditation, is one is why is there like this natural inclination for your mouth to be so tight and tense? Because you say like relax your jaw and release the tongue, but when you say that, like I notice there's like this, you're like clenched up tension almost,
Yeah, I think we could have a whole nother podcast on that.
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, for me personally, I noticed that like a tendency to hold here, to clench my tongue to the roof of my mouth. I've heard it said that excess thinking and worry, you know, gets kind of trapped in the mouth in that way when we hold. And then, you know, a lot of it is like we're not ever really listening deeply to our lives. So we're planning what we're going to say. We're planning, you know, this sort of like intellectual interaction. And we're almost like holding it in our mouth, you know, waiting.
Right.
Versus when we relax our jaw, when we release our tongue, the ears open in a way. The listening happens in a different way. And part of the stillness of getting quiet is like you listen, you hear silence. And I mean, we never really have full silence, but you hear, you know, when you're not speaking, when you're meditating.
Right.
You know?
Yep. No, that's cool. And then what about the whole part, like smiling between your eyes and that kind of stuff? Like that's another thing like I've never really thought about, but you can feel it like when you think about it.
Yeah, there's I mean, we're all holding our face, I think, when we're thinking and contriving and trying to figure things out. We scrunch up the brow. And then the center of the brain in yogic energetics is the pineal, the pituitary gland. That's your sixth chakra, your third eye. So that inner insight, that inner wisdom starts to open up when we relax the forehead, when we allow. And then that's also the imagination, that sixth chakra, third eye space.
Right.
And coming home and into that space of the psychedelics that are always available to us, you know, in the brain, allows for infinite kind of possibilities in our life.
Right. That's really cool. So what are kind of like, what do you think the benefit is for people like that kind of pursue either meditation or mindfulness study, and what can they get out of it?
I guess I'll just speak from my own experience. A sense of presence and aliveness and enjoying life. None of us are necessarily getting any younger. And there's no guarantee that, you know, our lives are only going to become better. Like, people we love get sick and old and pass away and die, and relationships end. And there's always going to be challenges and struggles in life, but it's how we navigate through those. It's the kind of presence that we bring to it. So for me personally, mindfulness and meditation practice has allowed me to show up and have better relationships, communicate better, to be content, to be easeful in the graying process, in the aging process, and, you know, and watching my daughter like move from my arms to be independent and in the world. And I mean, I do feel a sense of like health and well-being, you know, definitely on the days when I don't practice, it's like feels chaotic and ungrounded.
Yeah, that's really cool. No, I agree with you. I think it's important to get the most out of, you know, every moment you have. I hate the graying process, like, especially like because we film right here. I got this weird friggin' gray streak back here, and it's driving me insane. So, and then every day it's like, shit, man. Like the gray doesn't stop.
Gray is hip.
So
if you go to Williamsburg, I mean, come on, everyone's gray.
Is it really? Sweet. I guess we're hanging out there more. That's pretty funny. All right, Summer, I appreciate you coming in. Anything you want to talk about before we sign off here?
No, thank you so much for having me.
That's cool. I definitely encourage people to check out yogapeacekula.com, check out Summer's course. I mean, all their courses, but in particular the Tuesday night, is it 5:30?
5 p.m.
5 p.m. mindfulness class in Howell. Follow Yoga Peace Kula on Instagram, and follow Summer at sacred.shape on Instagram. Any plans? We didn't talk about like anything outside of your professional life, but you mentioned you do some singing. Are you gonna like get out there and sing anywhere in public anytime soon?
No, I'll keep meditating until that happens spontaneously.
All right, cool. So can you sing in your mind in a meditation? I mean, is that a spot to sing?
That would not be meditating. That would
be
be
the opposite.
doing something. Yeah.
All right, cool. All right, so you got to keep it to the cars for now and the shower and all that good stuff. Summer, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. I'm Evan Baumer. Follow me on Instagram at Evan Baumer and look for the MulletCast on Facebook. Thanks, Summer.
Thank you.